Bijan should be the biggest X factor to why the Falcons make the postseason.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. PrizePicks, run your game. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for nearly 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this pod that goes strong with me each and every day, that makes it your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available each and every day. So today's episode is going to be all about the Falcons run game, the changes that Zac Robinson is going to bring to the run scheme, whether or not this offensive line is going to step up, and debunking the narrative surrounding Bijan's lack of usage. But let's start talking about Bijan's breakout potential. And he is definitely poised for a breakout year, and how big a breakout that is will depend on some of these factors like Zac Robinson's run scheme, how good this offensive line is going to be. But if Bijan can have that type of big monster season from a production standpoint, it's going to be huge for this offense, because the Falcons' goal is to be a balanced offense. Their identity is going to be blending a strong running game coupled with a heavy dose of play action passing, which is going to allow Kirk Cousins to do what he does best, which is attack the middle of the field, a lot of in-breaking, a lot of crossing routes and whatnot. And, this offense is going to throw the ball more than they did under Arthur Smith, but they're not going to be this pass-first offense, right? They're still going to rely heavily on the run game, right? They're not really built to be this pass-first offense, right? We like our weapons, but these aren't like the weapons that you're looking at and be like, oh, this is an offense that's going to throw the ball 40, 50 times, like the offense that Kirk Cousins has come from Minnesota, right? That, as good as we think Drake London is going to be, and he's going to be good, potentially catching 90 to 100 balls this year, he's not Justin Jefferson. As good as Darnell Mooney should be, he's not Jordan Addison. As good as Kyle Pitts can be, he's probably the closest one to the TJ Hawkinson analog, but that's really about it. Because like the next tier of weapons for the Falcons with Ray McLeod and Charlie Warner and Kadero Hodge and all that and stuff, like that's not really built to be an offense that's going to drop back and throw the ball 40, 50 times and win that way. They'll be better suited to win those types of games the couple of times they need to than they have been in the past, but that's not really how they're going to win, 10 or 12 games doing that every single week. And, you couple that with Kirk coming off of the injuries, it remains to kind of be seen if this offensive line can truly hold up in a straight drop back passing attack like that, right? Where you have questions about McGarry and Bergeron and Dahlman. Can they hold up in that type of offensive line, that type of offense? Again, maybe, but we haven't seen it quite to this point. And so and I don't expect the Falcons passing game to be firing on all cylinders coming out of the gates this year. And so I think the more burden that the running game, especially early in the season, can take on, the better for this team. And when it comes to Bijan, like we're hoping for this Todd Gurley-esque type of season. Like we saw Todd Gurley at his peak in a very similar offense under Sean McVay in LA. And, I will drop my stat projections for this upcoming season later this week, probably Wednesday or Thursday when I'm done with those. The range for where I'm projecting Bijan right now is somewhere between like 220 carries and 250 carries or something like that. But I think it could be on the upper end of that spectrum. And, 240 plus is usually going to get you in the top 10 among highest usage in terms of running backs each year. And that should mean 1,000 to 1,200, maybe 1,300 yards for Bijan. And that's what we kind of saw with Todd Gurley at his peak. Seasons approaching 280 carries, 1,300 yards rushing, in addition to all the value he brought as a pass catcher in some of those years. And I expect Bijan to bring similar value as a pass catcher for the Falcons this year, particularly because I expect, Kirk Cousins to check the ball down a bunch because he's not going to be making that many plays on the second reaction, extending plays due to his limited mobility coming off the Achilles and whatnot. And so a lot of those times it's just going to be simply checking the ball down. And if Bijan can turn like 5-yard checkdowns into 15-yard gains, and we know he has the capability due to his ability to make guys miss in the open field, that's going to be a huge multiplier for the Falcons, where instead of, going, settling for a 2nd and 5 from the 40, it's a 1st and 10 from the opposing team's 45 or something like that on on their own 40 versus the opposing team's 45. Like if you can get another 10, 15 or more yards, just by Bijan being a dude, that's going to be a huge boost to this offense. And so, the potential is definitely there for Bijan to have this 1,800, 2,000 yards from scrimmage type of season that the very best running backs in the NFL typically do on an annual basis. And if Bijan can approach that number, that's going to be a huge X factor, a huge boost for the Falcons' success this year. If they can get that type of production from their RB1 this year, especially early in the season, I think that's going to be hugely valuable because, again, not expecting this passing game to come out of the gates firing on all cylinders. That I think as the season wears on, this passing game with Kirk and the rapport that him and his receivers are going to have, is going to grow. You got a first-year play caller, first-year quarterback. All these guys are new, and the expectation that, it's going to click immediately. Again, we would love to see it. Absolutely, we would love to see it. But I think there's going to be some growing pains. And later in the season, when they are sort of have built that rapport and clicking and firing on all cylinders, you couple that with the running game that we're hoping to get early in the season, a high-level running game, one of the best rushing teams in the league, then that's going to be huge for this offense moving forward, because the one general rule of thumb with football, it really doesn't matter what you're talking about, whether you're all talking about pass rushers or offense in this case, being good at two things is better than being good at one. So a team that can run the football and throw the football effectively is going to be better than any team that can just do one of those things effectively. But we'll have to sort of see if Bijan can reach those heights. Part of the conversation on whether he will is going to be centered around him getting more usage this year. And I want to continue today's episode kind of debunking the narrative that Bijan was misused last year, right? Where did that narrative come from and why it's so misleading? We'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, it is time to get back into stadium, and especially, next weekend for the Atlanta Falcons Pittsburgh Steelers action, and the best place to do so is Game Time, who is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can shop their flash deals, which are the exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game. With Game Time, what you see is what you get, whether it's from the panoramic seat views before you buy or the all-in prices, so you don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. And whether you're into football, baseball, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Game Time is going to help you with buying those tickets. All you got to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And this episode is also sponsored by BetterHelp. And what's something that you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that something that you lost in childhood? Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, and because your back to school era can come at any age. Therapy has taught me positive coping skills, like you can only control what you can control, and I use that every single Sunday when I'm watching the Atlanta Falcons. It helps empower me to be the best version of myself, and therapy isn't just for those people that have experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. And before we continue today's episode, I want to let you guys know about the new Locked On NFL, where it's a double dose, 2 shows each and every day. First, Madman Tyler Rowland is going to kick off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the local Locked On experts, and you'll get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, and detailed breakdowns in under 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day with Tyler Rowland, Tony Wiggins. Make it your second listen. Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So the Bijan narrative, that he was misused last year, I think is a false narrative. But I get where it comes from. Narratives are basically the stories we tell children. They're basic. They're often not true, but there's a kernel of truth to them, but they tend to get a little bit exaggerated. And I think with Bijan, a lot of that came from people that weren't necessarily watching the games, just watching the box scores, watching the highlights. And the highlights were clearly there early last season with Bijan. Some highlight reel plays against Carolina, Green Bay, Jacksonville, etc. And when people see those highlights, they're like, this guy's incredible. The Falcons just have to get him the ball and watch, incredible things tend to happen whenever Bijan gets the football. And then the highlights kind of went quiet for a couple of weeks. And then the next real chance we had to talk about Bijan came on the heels of that Week 7 game against Tampa Bay, where he didn't play due to the migraines. And people understandably were upset that weekend because a lot of people lost money that weekend based off of Bijan not playing. And so people were very upset with Arthur Smith after that weekend. And then, he made a couple of questionable play calls in the ensuing weeks against Tennessee and Minnesota, especially near the goal line, that caused people to lose their minds. That Jonnu Smith pass to Michael Pruitt, which was wide open, but Jonnu missed the throw. And then he ran the jet sweep to Jonnu Smith against Minnesota, and everybody was pissed because of 2 plays, right? And, it was basically Arthur Smith has no clue how to use Bijan Robinson. The main reason why the Falcons lost the Tennessee and Minnesota games was because Arthur Smith doesn't know how to use Bijan Robinson. And, those weren't really true. The next week against Arizona, the Falcons force-fed Bijan. He had a very productive game, but the Falcons still lost that game. But again, that doesn't matter because it doesn't fit the narrative, right? And, if you really want to boil down the Tennessee loss to a factual narrative rather than a false one, it's basically because the Falcons couldn't block Jeffrey Simmons and their defense got annihilated that game. Their entire game plan was geared around stopping Derrick Henry. They didn't stop Derrick Henry, and then they gave up, 4 big explosive touchdown plays in that game. But, of course, none of those fit the narrative, right? The narrative is the Falcons have one of the best offensive lines of football. So the fact that Jeffrey Simmons single-handedly wrecked that game doesn't fit that narrative. And then, of course, the Falcons defense is the main reason why they're competitive. And even though they had a terrible game that week, it doesn't fit that narrative. And then the Minnesota loss was because Taylor Heinicke can't run the offense, and they also can't tackle mobile quarterbacks like Josh Dobbs in that game. Again, neither one of those things fit the narrative. And so really the narrative was like everything has to deal with Arthur Smith or Desmond Ridder being, the reason for all the Falcons' problems. And so we'll just ignore everything that doesn't really fit that narrative. And that's just the nature of narratives, right? It's going to involve ignoring information and focusing only on the information that does fit, right? And, the Bijan not being utilized narrative to me was, and I commented this after the Vikings game, was one of the most overblown narratives I'd ever heard. And it was basically because of 2 plays, right? As I mentioned, 2 play calls that Arthur Smith didn't give the ball to Bijan near the goal line. And people were like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of sports. And, we'll probably hear a narrative at some point this year because the Falcons will be giving Bijan the ball in those instances. And it'll be like, hey, the Falcons are successful because of Bijan's, getting the ball more, when in reality, it's going to be the Falcons are successful and Bijan is getting the ball more. Those 2 things aren't directly related in the degrees that people want to make it out. But, we're not unfamiliar with narratives here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. We have the Parker Hesse agenda. That's a narrative, right? And for those of you that are unfamiliar, basically that narrative is built on the idea that in 2022, when Parker Hesse was served at the Falcons' main blocking tight end, they had one of the best rushing teams in the NFL. And in 2023, when Parker Hesse basically did not play the entire season outside of 3 games, right? They had one of the worst rushing offenses in the league, and they literally went from a top 5 to a bottom 5. And of course, is one player the cause of that sort of massive a shift? No, right? He's not the catalyst, but he is a catalyst in that when it comes to those things. And it's not a coincidence that the 3 games that Parker Hesse did play, and then the Falcons had 2 of the more successful rushing, or 2 of those games were some of their most successful of the day. And then the second half of that Jets game, the 3rd game, they were able to run the ball effectively, which is one of the reasons why they were able to hold on and beat the Jets on that particular Sunday. But, a big reason why that Parker Hesse agenda was pushed forth on this podcast and why it makes sense, again, it's not the reason, there's a variety of factors, but it was a big reason, was because, if you're going to run an outside zone blocking scheme, you need good perimeter blocking. And the Falcons were the most outside zone scheme under Arthur Smith these last couple of years, and they had good perimeter blocking in 2022. They did not have good perimeter blocking in 2023, and that was a big reason for the downfall. Not the only reason, but one of the bigger reasons for that downfall. And, a lot of people will tell you that downfall, that drop in production from 22 to 23 had little to do with, the Falcons blocking not being up to par, because again, the narrative is the Falcons have a top 5 offensive line, and any data, any observation to the contrary of that will just completely get ignored, even though it's staring you in the face, which is what happened last year. And it's clearly got to be Arthur Smith's fault, right? Arthur Smith's scheme was very predictable, which it was. And he's the reason why that run game didn't work. And so, let's talk a little bit more about some of the changes to the scheme in ways that Zac Robinson's scheme is going to be less predictable, the ways that he's going to diversify this run scheme and how that should benefit this offense. And we'll do that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's you versus the numbers, just you versus the numbers, right? All you got to do is pick more or less on up to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. And if you're looking to get on the action because other sports books aren't available in the state of Georgia, you don't have to worry. PrizePicks is. And withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes after I win. And so if you're willing to take a look at Bijan's stat projections for that week 1 matchup, more or less on 66.5 rushing yards, more or less on 25.5 receiving yards, 94.5 combined yards, 0.5 touchdowns, whatever you want. Just download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. So I think one of the biggest mysteries I have heading into the season is what exactly is going to be Zac Robinson's tweak to the scheme. Right? I still think outside zone is going to be a staple run play for this offense, but I think we're going to see, differences there, right? Arthur Smith was just basically spamming the stretch play last year, which is the bread and butter play of the outside zone run scheme. And I think we're probably not going to spam stretch plays to the degree that Arthur Smith did, and we'll mix in some different looks, inside zone, maybe a little bit more duo, some counter, very different things, right? A lot of split zone, I think, will probably be kind of our staple instead of the stretch play. Right. And I think diversifying the scheme from Zac Robinson will benefit the Falcons' run game. Is that going to be the main reason for their success? Probably not, because running the football still boils down to, getting a hat on a hat. It's football at its core, which is just simply my guy is going to push your guy. That's kind of what running the football is. It gets down to. It's why, some old school coaches are just, hardcore about running the football. So, I think the scheme can definitely enhance the blocking if the blocking is there, but you still got to block is basically what I'm getting at. And I think that was what was missing last year. The blocking took a major step back. But again, the narrative was that, Arthur Smith's scheme was predictable, which it was. It was very predictable, but, it was just as predictable in 2022. And that didn't really stop them from being able to run the ball down everybody's throats simply because the blocking was there in 2022. It's not like defenses didn't know what was coming in 2022. They were like, oh my God, they got Marcus Mariota at quarterback and they just ran for 200 yards last week against this other team. I wonder what the Falcons are going to do this week, right? It wasn't like defenses were surprised by that, but they still couldn't stop it, right? And, the fact was that defenses actually stacked the box more in 2022 than they did in 2023 against the Atlanta Falcons, yet the run game took a step back. And I can show you clips from 2022 where, Tyler Algier is running through these miles wide running lanes, nicknamed it the Autobahn, that year because of how big these lanes were. And those lanes were just kind of non-existent throughout the 2023 season. It was one of the reasons why we were so excited about what Bijan could be in last year's offense, because we just assumed those running lanes are going to be the same. And if Algier's, getting these 30 and 40-yard gains running through these wide open holes, just, what's Bijan going to do? Get 60, 80 yards? He's going to take it to the house every single time? That's what we were envisioning. And obviously the Falcons didn't live up to that, and they need to get back to that. The offensive line is going to need to step up, right? And I think, it starts with Zac Robinson diversifying the scheme, but I think one of the bigger mysteries when it comes to what Zac Robinson's offensive scheme overall is going to look like is how does he marry some of the Falcons' do run schemes with their play action concepts, right? The staple of Arthur Smith was that stretch play, that outside zone stretch play. And oftentimes you run sort of a bootleg or a rollout off of that stretch play. And I don't think, given Kirk Cousins' presence on this team, that that's going to be as much of a staple. And so that's why I kind of expect the split zone to kind of be their staple run play that's going to take better advantage of misdirection and motion from blockers and whatnot, and still get you the same angles that a stretch play would get you. It's just a slight variation of that zone run play. And so we'll see what that. And I also think we'll probably see a healthier mix of jet sweeps and end arounds, utilizing Ray McCloud as that third wide receiver in the slot, and he'll be perfect for that. And that will be other ways that the Falcons can still attack the perimeter in the outside zone run scheme rather than just relying on the stretch play and spamming that play over and over and over again as they have done these last couple of years. So I think if the Falcons can get better blocking, that should boost things, obviously. As I said earlier, in general, if you are good at two things, it's better than being good at one thing. And when you couple the run game and the play action passing, those are going to be the two things that you are expecting the Falcons offense to be good at this year. And so this year is going to kind of be discovering which season between 22 and 23 is the outlier, right? Meaning that, was the good blocking in 2022 the outlier, and this year is going to more resemble what we saw last year, which was subpar blocking, or was 2023 the outlier, and this year is going to be more resembling of 2022, where you had very, very good blocking that year. And, I think there's every reason to think that last year was the outlier and that this year you're going to see this run game and this offense bounce back and look more like the 2022 version of the Falcons. You have the continuity of running it back with the same starting five. You have the diversifying of the run game from Zac Robinson. And so, the Falcons will be less predictable. And so therefore keep defenses on their toes. And then of course you have Bijan being that sort of X factor, breakout featured weapon and being able to, turn those 3-yard gains into 5-yard gains, or turn those 5-yard gains into 10 or 15-yard gains because of his ability to make guys miss on the second reason. And so I think, again, there's every reason to believe that the Falcons run game should bounce back this year. I just typically happen to be a guy that tends to believe it when I see it, right? And I need to see it against Pittsburgh, against Philadelphia, against Kansas City, right? Because we know that those are very good defensive lines. And if this offensive line is going to be any good, they need to prove it against formidable fronts, which is something that they did not do last year. That pretty much anytime they faced any, blue or red chip D lineman, D tackle, edge rusher, or whatever, those guys tended to take over those games. And basically what I'm sitting here telling you, if that continues to be the trend this year, like we saw with Jeffrey Simmons last year in the Titans game, like we saw with, Derek Brown and Brian Burns in that week 1 game against Carolina, and Kenny Clark in week 2, et cetera, right? Like if that continues to be a trend this year, that's going to be a problem because pretty much every week they're going to be facing some blue chip or red chip, defensive lineman or defensive tackle, defensive end, outside linebacker, et cetera. And so if we continue to see the offensive line struggle to block those guys, it's going to create problems for this front, not only in the run game, but also in the passing game. So that's going to be a big question. But I still think outside zone is going to be the staple of this offense. It's still going to be the staple of this offense. They'll just diversify the types of outside zone runs that they run, a healthier dose of split zone. They'll incorporate more duo, more counter, all those various things rather than just going spamming hardcore on outside zone scheme. But this offensive line is still built to be an outside zone scheme. Jake Matthews is not a guy that you're going to be asking to just bully guys off the line of scrimmage. That's not really his game. He's an outside zone guy. Chris Lindstrom, despite his reputation according to PFF as the best guard in football, he's not the best guard in football. He's one of the best guards in football. But if you were going to make the argument why Chris Lindstrom is the best guard in football, it is because he's one of, if not the best, outside zone blocking guard, right? When we've talked in the past about what you're looking for in an outside zone blocking scheme from your interior guys, your guards, your centers, it's being that heat-seeking missile in the second level to take out linebackers that is going to open up creases for your running back to hit those second level and make those cutbacks and whatnot and turning those 5-yard gains into 10-yard gains, Chris Lindstrom is extremely good at that. That's the thing that he's best at. And so if you want to build your offense around this offensive line, and that's a big part of why the Rams made that switch away from the outside zone across Sean McVay's time there and Zac Robinson's time there, is because their personnel no longer fit really playing that style of offense. I think you're going to still lean heavily on the outside zone run scheme. Now, there may be a time in the future where the Falcons blockers, and again, Bergeron and McGarry are probably the two that you would say those guys fit well and could fit well in a scheme that isn't heavily predicated on the outside zone scheme, but we'll have to sort of see. Like we've seen McGarry do the stuff. We need to see Bergeron sort of make that step. So we'll see what the Falcons do. But again, I think the run game, there's every reason to believe that the run game should be good this year, that Bijan's going to have this breakout year. Again, I don't think it's going to be because, hey, they just utilize Bijan more. It's going to be like, hey, this offense is healthier in general. And part of the reason of that, again, probably not the biggest reason for that, is that Bijan is being utilized more. And as long as the blocking is there, they will be justified in using Bijan more. That's the other part that was missing from last year, is like Bijan was the team's least efficient running back behind Tyler Algier. Why did I say Bergeron? Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson. And so like that was part of it, where it was like, yeah, it's like the running game's a little bit better when they're not force feeding Bijan, but I don't think that's going to be the case this year. So expecting a big year for Bijan. I should start calling him Bijan rather than Bijan. It's going to be a hard habit to break, but we'll work on it. So today I'll just go hard on the Bijan, and moving forward, I will try to call him Bijan. I just don't like it. Bijan just sounds somewhat better, but I can't even use the mama called him this. I'm going to call him this because that's not what his mama calls him. So, anyway, so we'll see what the Falcons run game looks like this year, guys. We'll have more content coming your way talking about this run game as the week unfolds, give you some projections on this season. My official, preseason predictions will be coming later this week. We'll have several guests on later this week. So you're in store for a lot of content this week. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. All you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL for your second listen. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta. If you're feeling frisky about what the Dogs did on Saturday, check out Locked On Bulldogs. Feeling frisky about what the Hawks and Braves are going to continue to do later this year, then check out Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every